Welcome, Jessica Procini, to the Balanced, Beautiful, Abundant Show.
Yay, so excited to be here.
I'm so excited to see you. I've had this interview on my calendar for 2 months, and I've been counting the days till we can finally talk about emotional eating and your solution to it, which I can't wait to hear about. But first, I want to tell my listeners all about you. So, Jessica is an emotional eating healer and founder of Escape from Emotional Eating. She designed Escape from Emotional Eating because Overeaters Anonymous didn't resonate with her, and therapy wasn't enough when it came to her food issues. She is now 100% free from her compulsion with food, and she helps others to do the same through her retreats, transformational programs, and live events and virtual events now.
Yes.
Jessica has been awarded the top health coach, hello, by the Institute of the Psychology of Eating 3 years in a row. Wow, what an honor. And she has been featured on major media outlets like CBS, Philadelphia Magazine, and Mind Body Green, just to name a few. So I'm so excited to have you on the show. And this is such a timely issue because people are at home, they're stressed out about the pandemic. I know alcoholism has gone up like 400%, and I'm sure emotional eating, I don't know if there's statistics, but I'm sure people being home and being stressed about the political divisiveness and the pandemic and when is this going to end? Is the vaccine safe? I'm sure emotional eating is just going through the roof. So
Yeah.
tell our listeners, how do you define emotional eating, Jessica?
So I define emotional eating as using food for a purpose other than fuel. Meaning, if you're stressed, you eat. If you're anxious, you eat. If you're overwhelmed, you eat. Even if you're overjoyed and you eat. Using food for a purpose other than fuel is the fundamental definition of emotional eating. Now, when I say that, people tend to get their panties in a twist because they're thinking that, well, that means I can't have cookies, or that means I can't have pizza or the foods that I love. And that's not what it's about. Emotional eating really has very little to do with what you're actually eating because we can emotionally eat healthy food too. That was a large part of my journey and why I didn't really know I was an emotional eater because I wasn't eating 10 bags of potato chips every night. But it's why we are eating, and that why and that primary intention of why we're moving towards food is the definition of, well, are we emotional eating or are we not?
So, in my opinion, the opposite of emotional eating is intuitive eating. Can you speak into that? How do you define intuitive eating?
So, intuitive eating, when it comes to emotional eating, at the core is where we are headed.
Mhm.
But if you say to an emotional eater, oh, just eat intuitively, they're
Right.
going to be like, do you understand how hard that is? Because
Mhm.
there is such a disconnect between mind and body when it comes to our relationship with food. So if we start out being like, oh, just, intuitively eat, there's so much stuff in the way. Our emotions, fear, stress, anxiety, there's so much static on the radio station of our intuition that we can't hear it. And in the work that I do with my clients, we work first to clear out the static, the stress, the anxiety, the overwhelm, the fear, so that we can have an easier time listening to ourselves and then trusting what we're hearing because there's been years of, distrust when it comes to our body. So we have to repair that trust in order to really intuitively eat successfully. So, there are a few pre-steps to be able to intuitively eat, but what intuitive eating is really about not eating from what you should be eating, not eating from compulsion, not eating from comparison to what are other people doing, but really taking every eating experience as a present moment experience to connect deeply to what is it that I truly need. And whether that's food, whether that's emotional needs, that process of like turning inward to connect with what is true for us will lead us to make a healthier food decision.
And I think too, for me, there's ways to be more present so I can hear my intuition, because
Mhm.
one of the things that I struggle with, Jessica, is I eat way too fast. And it's like I eat just to get it done and go on to the next thing. So I don't digest as well and I'm not enjoying it. I'm not being mindful. I'm not really listening to the signals. So, what do you tell your clients about being more mindful when they're eating?
So when I work with my clients, it's really about making food and our food experiences sacred. It's really about number one, making sure that there's time
Mhm.
in your day to actually eat. Because I work with very high achieving, very busy women who can literally go from like 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. without eating. And
Wow.
then they get to 7 p.m. and they're dying and they'll just eat everything.
Mhm.
So we want to make sure that there's time booked into our schedules to actually eat. And for myself, like that is protected time. I
Mhm.
think before I got on this podcast, I said something to my husband where I was like, "Oh, I'll never skip lunch." I forget what we were talking about, but I was like, I'll never skip a meal because it has a ripple effect where I start to disconnect from myself. My hunger gets to be a real distraction. I'm not able to focus as much. So having just the time booked into our schedule to eat is really, really important. And then it's really about making the meal experience really enjoyable. For me, I'm not the person who's going to sit there and count how many times I chew. Like, that's not enjoyable to me. That's torture.
Yeah.
I'm not the type of person who is going to like put her fork down after every bite. Again, that's not enjoyable for me. That creates a stress response in my body. I want to just be able to eat normal. But I know when I'm sort of eating quote unquote normal or I'm eating and my mind is somewhere else. Because if my mind is somewhere else, what will happen is I'll look down, I'll see there's no more food there and I'll wonder who came in and ate it all. I'll sort of be like what happened because I wasn't present. And being present with our food is really about connecting to our sensations. What do we see? What do we smell? What do we feel? What do we taste? What are we touching? And food is a sensory experience. And when we can be present with those sensations, then it is a mindful experience. But for people who have a complicated relationship with food, again, it's sort of like I was saying with intuitive eating, it sounds a lot simpler than it is because there's just so much baggage, there's just so much that gets in the way. And, a compulsive experience with food is definitely when we are not present, but it also feels like we're not in control. Feels
Mm.
like something has taken over our bodies, and we're sort of like, I know I shouldn't be doing this, but I can't stop with these chips, or I can't stop with this thing. One example of like mindful meal experiences and sacred meal experiences is a practice that I do with my clients when we're either in our in-person retreats pre-COVID, but now we've switched to virtual retreats, but we still eat together,
Mhm.
even though we're on this virtual retreat. And I design the meal and guide them through the meal to support a reconnecting to themselves. And there have been so much feedback about these experiences over the years where women have told me like, oh my gosh, like I've never tasted how delicious this food is. She's like, I know this isn't anything like fancy or anything, but like it's just so good. And she said that and followed it up with saying how in the past when she would eat, she would just hear this nagging voice in her head about like her body and how much she weighed and just constantly berating her as she was eating, so she was never able to be fully present with her food. But on the retreat and through our work together, she was able to have that experience where not only was she able to really connect with her hunger and her fullness and eat when she was hungry and stop when she was full, but she was like, oh my gosh, like food is delicious. And I'm like, yes, yes, it is. Um, but when we can have this practice, right, it's such a healing process because we're able to reconnect with ourselves, be present to what is, and then, follow through. And then our relationship with food becomes very simple, where we eat when we're hungry, we stop when we're full, and we move on, which is how I believe, food really should be, rather than this thing that we're constantly obsessed with or held back because of.
Right. And what I wonder is so many people are counting calories and they're counting
Mhm.
macros and they're using Weight Watcher points and they're weighing themselves and they're measuring themselves. And to me, that is just like trading one compulsion for another. And it's
Yeah.
still trying to have a very oppressive relationship with food and body image. What I teach my clients and what I like is throw away your scales and
Hmm.
just eat to live, don't live to eat. And that's what you're teaching, but you hone in more on the micro, where you can't just wave a magic wand and have someone not be obsessed with food. You have
Yeah.
to actually change their paradigm. So I
Yeah.
wanted to talk about your experience with Overeaters Anonymous. So I've
Mhm.
been in around 12-step groups for a long time, almost my whole life, my whole adult life since I was a teenager. And I am abstinent from alcohol, and that's pretty simple, right? Because you just put the plug in the jug and then you never drink again, one day at a time, God willing, right? But
Yeah.
with food, with money, with relationships, those 12-step programs are different because you actually have to change your paradigm.
Yeah.
You have to change how you relate to food. So I was just curious about your opinion on Overeaters Anonymous, how the 12 steps did not help your relationship with food.
Yeah. Excuse me. Sorry. There's
Yeah.
something in my throat.
Oh, it's okay.
Um, I'm just going to take a sip of water.
Of
Hold on a second.
course. Of course. I will too.
So, my experience with Overeaters Anonymous, I mean, the first thing that I want to say is that Overeaters Anonymous is a wonderful program and it is designed for a specific type of person. And then there was me. um, so like I started emotionally eating when I was 6 years old. I didn't know what I was doing was emotional eating until I was about 25, because I didn't fit the typical stereotype. I didn't have hundreds of pounds to lose. Um, I would never, back then, I didn't call myself like a food addict or anything. But looking back, I definitely had a very unhealthy, compulsive relationship with food, where food was like my best friend. I always had snacks in my bag. Like anytime life got difficult, I turned to food. Food was always there for me. So when I started to discover that, my problem was emotional eating, and I only really discovered that after I had already gone through nutrition school and become a full-time fitness instructor and realized those things were not solving my problem. There must be something else. When I started to discover I was an emotional eater, I started looking at my options for support, and there was very little out there. Very little compared to what there is now.
Mhm.
Um, One of the things that not only I struggled with, but I know a lot of other women struggle with, is that emotional eating is not a diagnosis. Your doctor, unless they're like really a conscientious doctor, will not say your problem is emotional eating, here's a prescription, or, you should do this thing. It's usually a conversation around weight.
Mm.
So if we're not really, having these conversations and it's not being called out, people will try to go to one of two ways. They'll either go to like Overeaters Anonymous, or they'll try to attack it through fitness and food, through fitness and nutrition. And I was clear, okay, fitness and nutrition doesn't work because I've been there, done that. And then my option is Overeaters Anonymous. And you know how there's people who like either like the beach or they like to go skiing, but they don't really like both.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that was sort of my experience with Overeaters Anonymous. Like I like to go to the beach, and Overeaters Anonymous was sort of like skiing, and like I'm not going to do that.
Because of all the control of having to like email your sponsor every day with everything you ate, is that the
Oh,
problem?
that would just be a complete trigger. Like I didn't
Like,
even
I
know
know
that.
people who, I mean, I know about the HAL program, people who have to bring a little scale and weigh their food at every meal. I know people that have to email their sponsor every single night with everything they ate. I find
Yeah.
that very restrictive.
Yeah, that's like even just saying that's like very like triggering. Because
Wow.
again, the issue isn't what you're eating, it's why you're eating.
Yes.
So the other thing that I'll say about Overeaters Anonymous is that I come from many generations of addiction. Like generations before me were really about alcoholism. And when I was looking at support, like I just felt like it wasn't right for me. Like I didn't want to do a 12-step program. Um, I needed a different kind of support. One that, number one, was going to get to the root of what was going on because I wanted to be free. I didn't want to just sit in a circle and talk about what I ate and then, hear other people talk about it. Like, I wanted solutions. I wanted a coach. I wanted a pathway to freedom. And when I was clear, like, I'm not going to Overeaters Anonymous, um, like, that's when I started to see, like, what are the other options? And there weren't really any. So once I was clear, like, wow, there really isn't support out there for this in a different way. It's either, you know, you fit into this box of Overeaters Anonymous, or you gotta just, diet and exercise. That's when I was like, there needs to be another way. And that's really where my passion and the creation of Escape from Emotional Eating really came from, because I know my clients, the women that I work with who are high achieving, who are busy, they're not going to go to Overeaters Anonymous either. And they've tried dieting and they've tried exercising. They know how to eat healthy. They don't have hundreds of pounds to lose. But this thing with food is just been with them for years, and they want peace more than anything.
I think that is the goal of anything, right?
Mhm.
Any religion, program, spirituality, community, the goal is to have peace around it. So that's so beautiful that you found peace. So it said in your bio that you did 10 years of research. So can you tell us a
Mhm.
little bit about how you researched finding a solution for emotional eating?
Yeah, so it was sort of picking up from that story around, like, I was clear Overeaters Anonymous wasn't my home. Um, at that point, I had already spent over like 932 hours in therapy, and that's not an exaggeration. Like I had spent years in therapy, going often twice a week,
Mm.
and it never touched my relationship with food. Like I was not getting anywhere. That's when having my nutrition background, having my background in fitness, and then having my background in psychology was really where I started to be like, all right, like I've got to find a solution to this. And that's when I started to identify patterns. I would just like I have so journals and journals, like bookshelf full of them, of like patterns of my relationship with food, and not only my relationship with food, but with the women that I was working with during that time. There were similarities, there were connections. I was noticing that there were these concrete patterns, which I eventually got born into what is now the four roots of emotional eating. So, what I discovered from years and years of just research and digging in and looking deeper and getting to the root of what is going on, I identified the four roots. So now, when I work with someone, we can drill it down to one of these four roots. And the root is what is triggering the action of emotional eating. So, a lot of emotional eating support is just looking at the surface. But what I do is really getting to the bottom of it, because only when we root it out will we be truly free. And that's how I can, sit here today and be like, it's been 5 years since I've emotionally eaten. And I don't see myself going back to that anytime soon because I've done the deeper work. I didn't just settle for, oh, I need to have green smoothies and I need to work out every day, because I knew that wasn't my savior. It was about getting to the roots, pulling it out so that I could be free. And now that's everything that I teach my clients how to do. And honestly, any compulsive pattern, I believe, is rooted in one of these four roots, whether that pattern showing up with food, shopping, alcohol, sex. I just,
Gambling, it's all the same. It's all,
yeah,
using something outside to fill a God-sized hole, like it's a spiritual sickness.
exactly.
And really
Exactly.
nothing's gonna fill it except for spirituality. So
It
it's
is definitely a part of the process. I wouldn't say just spirituality is going to heal our relationship with food, although I believe in miracles. But
yeah,
we have to do our part as
right.
humans. Like, we have to, heal the actual actions that we're doing. Spirituality is a part of the process, but we also have to look at the physical, the mental, and the emotional when
Mhm.
it comes to our relationship with food as
So
well.
in your opinion, is it from childhood trauma? Does it go all the way back to childhood trauma, or could it be something that happened as an adult? Like, I know that some people are triggered by a breakup where they either
Mhm.
starve themselves and stop eating because they're so upset, or they compulsively binge, or they're even exercise bulimics. Like, what is it in your opinion? It could be at any time in their lives that they get triggered into emotional eating, or is it all childhood trauma?
It's definitely not all childhood trauma, because I've definitely worked with people who did not start emotionally eating until much later in life. Um, so so there's both. There's the childhood trauma, and then there's just like a misfiring in the brain. There's just a point in life where, like, our mental wires get crossed, and all of a sudden we're seeing food as fun, we're seeing food as an escape, we're seeing food as, you know a way to stuff down how we're feeling, and we just lose our way. So it's definitely both, and I think that's really important to share, because I think a lot of people have this very narrow view of emotional eating. They think, okay, someone who's obese, someone who is depressed, someone who eats 10 bags of potato chips, someone who had a really tough childhood. And that's, sure, there's components of that, but it's not the end all be all. There are people who are very smart, very educated, very enlightened, who struggle with emotional eating.
Yeah. Wow. This is so interesting. So, what are the 3 steps to stop stress eating?
So the first step is to really manage the energy, right? So stress is just a symptom of a deeper problem, in the same way that emotional eating is a symptom of a deeper problem. So when I'm working with my clients, the first thing that we're really focusing on is about building emotional fitness. so that challenges don't feel so challenging and we're not looking to escape. We're able to have emotional resilience, have emotional stamina, so we can handle challenges in different ways rather than just immediately escaping with food. So the first thing is to build emotional fitness and manage the energy. And I do that in my work with my clients by teaching them tools like the fear flush and digesting emotions. These are tools that I created throughout my journey and still use today to help manage stress and anxiety and overwhelm. So it's the volume of it isn't so
The
high.
fear flush.
The fear flush.
What is that?
So the fear flush, like a lot of my tools that I teach, is a writing exercise that is really about transforming fear. And it's, it got its name because like at the end of it, it really is about purging the fear. And what I recommend to my clients is either like burning the paper that they wrote on and did the exercise on, but that can be challenging. So it started to adapt into the fear flush because you can rip it up and flush it down the toilet.
Nice. And I do think fear is the root of all negative behavior, and
Yeah.
you can say it's forgetting everything's all right, or
Hmm.
face everything and recover.
Yeah. So fear is actually one of the four roots of emotional eating. It's
Mhm.
actually like a solid root of the compulsive behavior. But to jump back to your question, so the second part about how to stop stress eating is about untangling our physical hunger from our emotional hunger. So when we are stress eating, if you're not physically hungry, which when you're stress eating, you usually aren't, or it may be sort of like mixed in, what we're actually searching for is an emotional need. We're actually searching for something, but we don't know how to give ourselves what we truly need. So we're trying to use food as a replacement.
Mhm.
So, in untangling physical and emotional hunger, which is the second step of escape from emotional eating, is really about deciphering and understanding the language of your body. Is this physical hunger or is this emotional hunger? If you're physically hungry, by all means eat. If you're emotionally hungry, then it's about learning through our work together how to feed yourself emotionally. How do I make myself feel safe? How do I make myself feel comforted? How do I make myself feel a sense of belonging, especially in a time of isolation?
Mhm.
So it's about giving ourselves that true, deep emotional need. And then once we've sort of laid that groundwork, then when it comes to stress eating, then it's about healing the roots. And this is everything that I'm so passionate about is about really getting to the root of what's going on and healing it so you can be free.
That is beautiful. Thank you so much. So that leads me to the next question perfectly. How can people heal the roots of emotional eating?
Well, the first step is just knowing what they are. And then the second step is how to start working with them. So I invite you to go to free video on my website, escapefromemotionaleating.com. Grab that free video, watch it because it'll identify what the four roots of emotional eating are and how to start working with them. So that's escapefromemotionaleating.com. Now, I will say that the four roots have nothing to do with how much water did you drink, how much sleep did you get. As we said earlier in our conversation, fear is one of the roots, but there are also three more. So when we know what the three or the four roots are, then we can start working with them and we can start to experience more freedom and peace in our relationship with food.
I love that. So that's going to be in the show notes, that video on the four roots of emotional eating. I'm so excited to watch that. Thank you for the gift for our listeners.
Yes.
So, speaking of gifts, what is the gift with, you said in your bio, the gift of having compulsions with food? What does that mean?
So the gift of our compulsions, when we really understand the reason why we're eating and we start to do the healing work around the roots, the gift is the journey and the transformation that we are on. And one of the things that I share with my clients all the time is how healing my relationship with food has been the best thing that I've ever done in my entire life. Better than getting married. Don't tell my husband, but it's true.
He won't
Um,
listen to the show. I'm just kidding.
better than starting my business. Like, it has literally been the best thing in my entire life. And I can probably say will continue to be, especially as, I get older and things like that, because I take myself everywhere I go. So healing my relationship with food was ultimately about healing my relationship with myself, because our eating is based in our thoughts, our beliefs, our emotions, and our past.
Mm-hmm.
So as I was healing my relationship with food, I was actually repairing my relationship with myself, to where now I have a deep, deep sense of trust, a deep, deep sense of safety within myself. I no longer feel threatened by my emotions or sensations that I feel in my body. And that has impacted everything. It's impacted my marriage, it's impacted my relationship with money, it's impacted my relationship with, work and how I work. Um, and there's just so much that has changed and happened because I healed my relationship with food. I mean, I really am a completely different person. And I see that happen for my clients all the time. And there's such gifts in the willingness to heal ourselves. And I truly believe, I think there's like 70% of people have an unhealthy relationship with food.
Mm.
And I often think about, when I was in that place of really struggling in my relationship, how much time and energy I spent worrying, frustrated, angry, and just clueless when it came to like what was really going on in my relationship with food. And I often think about, like, what would the world look like if 70% of the people were free? If
Mm-hmm.
70% of the people were not worried about their body, were not worried about, did they eat too much? Did they eat enough? How much did they eat? you know, how am I going to work this off? Like, all of those thoughts, that's a lot of energy. What would our world look like if we were free? And I just see how everything would change, because everything changed in my life. And I see it again for my clients. I really feel like we would be living in a different world, a much happier one, a much more peaceful one, because our relationship with food is, it is complicated in some ways, but it's also really simple.
Mm-hmm.
And I once had a client say to me, like, I feel like food, she was like, I feel like food is like, fighting with food is like fighting with oxygen. Like, I need it, like, I have to have it to survive, but I don't need to like restrict and then like manipulate. Like, it's just there. It's just a way that I need to live. And yes, we experience pleasure from food. I'm not saying that we don't, but when it turns compulsive is where it turns destructive.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very dark path to be walking.
Yeah. I mean, do you think food compulsion is a first world problem? Because in third world countries, well, first of all, in third world countries, they're a lot happier than we are. In first world, they're like, in huts and using, the outhouse or whatever. But I think they're happier because they don't have so much abundance with food and shopping and gambling and credit cards. Like they're eating to live, like you're saying. they're not putting a lot of obsession on it because they're in survival mode. So I know probably no one's ever asked you that question. It just popped into my head. But I mean, do you think it's a first world problem?
I really can't expertly answer that question. We would have to do some extensive research. But what I was surprised, in my years of research and experience and working with my clients was how across different countries and cultures,
Mm.
the issues are the same.
Mhm.
So I've worked with women from the Netherlands, Iceland, the UK, Australia, like India, like just all over the world. Very, very different ways of living, very,
Yes.
very different cultures. And the roots and the issues are the same.
Yes.
So that was when, that was what really solidified, my research in the four roots that this isn't just about, being an American and having an abundance of food. This is everywhere. And even though I work with only women, in the past, I have worked with a handful of men. And again, the roots are the same, whether
Mhm.
you're female or male or whatever gender you identify with, the roots are the same. And, I think there's wonderful opportunity in that because it just simplifies everything,
Mm.
right? Because if we're distracted and being like, oh, it's just for this subset or this type of person, then we can sort of avoid the work. But, when we all know that we're struggling together, it can bring a sense of relief and then expedite our healing process.
So what you're saying is no matter what the culture or country, everybody has trauma. Everybody has negative self-talk that they can heal from. And when they heal from that, then they can change their relationship with food. And when they
Mhm.
change their relationship with food, it changes their relationship with everything. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
So leave us with this. This has been an amazing interview. What is the number one tool that listeners can use to get started with today to heal their relationship with food?
Yes. So, do we have a little bit of time because I want to be able to explain this? Like 5
Yeah,
minutes?
yeah, we have time. We have until the top of the hour.
Oh, okay.
So explain it. I want my listeners to really have a tool from your wonderful tool chest. So explain.
Okay. So, the tool that I want to focus on is found in the step of untangling physical hunger from emotional hunger.
Mhm.
And it's the tool of the hunger scale,
Mm.
or the hunger and fullness scale. And I actually want to focus on the fullness side of it. So there's two different scales.
Mhm.
I want to focus solely on the fullness because this is what's most easy to start practicing with, especially if you're going to eat lunch later or dinner or tomorrow or whatever. So if you have a piece of paper, I recommend, taking out that piece of paper and just writing down a scale of 1 to 10. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we have a scale of 1 to 10. And on this scale is your body's fullness signals. That 10, underneath the 10, you want to write like Thanksgiving Day stuff.
Okay.
This is where
Food
you
coma.
Yeah, food coma, you feel sick.
Yeah.
You're like, oh gosh, I definitely overdid it. Maybe you have to unbutton your pants. You pretty much can't think about anything other than food and sleep. That is definitely the 10.
Mhm.
And I'd go as far to say we've all been there.
Mhm.
Where we want to start aiming for, what true fullness is a 7 on that scale.
Mm.
So if you have that piece of paper, circle the 7, and it's what I call eating for integrity.
Mm. Nice.
So this is not about restriction. This is not about eating until you are 70% full. That is not what this is about. 10 is that stuff. 7 is the sweet spot. It's that spot where you know you are satiated, where you feel physically satiated. There may be some kicking and screaming and some emotional noise about really honoring that 7 and ending the food there or your meal there, especially if there's food on your plate. And that's where a lot of my work comes in, is like clearing out that noise so you can really land at that 7 beautifully and gracefully. But starting to land at that 7 and honor your body at that 7 is what starting to honor your physical hunger and fullness is really all about. So this is something you can practice the next time that you're eating. Imagine, or maybe you have that written scale in front of you. Imagine that scale of 1 to 10. And as you're eating, just check in with yourself. Where am I on this scale? If Thanksgiving Day stuffed and food coma is a 10, where am I? Take a moment, pause, connect in with yourself, and then if you're not at that 7, keep eating. If you are at that 7, it's time to stop and move on. So that's just a small clip of untangling physical and emotional hunger by honoring your fullness that you can practice today.
I love that. And you call that the hunger scale?
The hunger scale, and the 7 is what I call, I'm sorry, that is the fullness scale. And the 7 is what I call eating for integrity. Because again, it's not about willpower, it's not about restriction, it's not about manipulating our bodies or tricking our bodies. If you're trying to trick your body, you're like, good luck, because your body is so smart. It is so smart and so intelligent, and much more intelligent than we give it credit. But eating for integrity is about honoring what is really your satiation level. So this is where you can, eat cookies and you can have pizza when you're honoring that 7.
Yes, it's about moderation.
Yeah, I try not to use that word with emotional eaters, because again, it goes to quantity.
Yeah.
And it's really about, again, like connecting and listening to yourself, honoring, where are you on that fullness scale? And that can look different days.
So it's integrity, not moderation.
Yes.
I have really enjoyed this conversation, Jessica. You're incredible. You have absolutely opened my mind as far as emotional eating and have so many solutions. So how do my listeners stay in touch with you?
Well, come on over to escapefromemotionaleating.com, grab that video. Let's start this work on the 4 roots so that you can be free and experience long-lasting peace and freedom in your relationship with food. So that's Escape from Emotional Eating. If you want to connect with me on social, you can find my handles at escapefromemotionaleating.com as well. But grab that free video. Let's start doing this deeper work and set you free.
Thank you so much. And if you listen to this podcast and you know someone else who struggles with emotional or stress eating, which is 7 out of 10 people, so I know you know a lot of people, please tag them in this Facebook Live video, share this with a couple of friends. If you're listening to the podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe and share it. We are grassroots. We don't have sponsors. We are just sharing this person to person who really cares about their fellow human being and wants them to have a balanced, beautiful, abundant life. So thank you again for being our guest on the Balanced, Beautiful, Abundant show, Jessica. And we look forward to having another wonderful expert next week. Thanks again, everyone. Stay balanced, beautiful, and abundant.